Bonjour, hola, kaixo. Welcome to Hendaye, just about on the French side of the French-Spanish border and bang in the middle of Euskadi, Basque country, and welcome to another travelling turtle adventure. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that I was the sort of small child who was given the Thomas Cook's European Railway timetable as a present. If you look at the Spain key map of that timetable, you'll find a beautiful looking straight line that runs along the northern coast of Spain. Now, that's the principle. The reality is slightly different. That's not a fast, direct route from here to Ferrol in the top left-hand corner of Galicia. Rather, it's Europe's longest narrow-gauge railway, running 630 kilometres from here all the way along that Atlantic coast. And I've always wanted to take that journey. It's not fast. It's going to take us 3 days. It incorporates everything from local metro services on what were railway lines built for the Industrial Revolution in the most industrialised corner of Spain, right through to relatively new local lines, sparsely populated, very little used, very slow, through numerous little villages in some of the most remote bits of Spain. Do join us headlong on this exciting little journey on Europe's longest narrow gauge trip. But of course, we can't leave Hendaye and its neighbour across the border, Euskadi, without a short diversion to their geekiest tourist attraction. Behold, Pheasant Island. Doesn't have any pheasants, I can see some ducks, but what's actually special about it is that in about 6 weeks' time, the Franco-Spanish border will run straight down the middle of this channel here, cutting right through the middle of a pair of courting swans. But for now, it runs down the middle of the channel over there. Uniquely for anywhere in the world, for convoluted historical reasons, Little Pheasant Island in the middle of the River Bidasoa switches from French to Spanish control every 6 months. Every August the 1st, some middling French civil servant gets to add the title of Viceroy of Pheasant Island to their letterhead, until the following February the 1st. I'll put a link in the description to a brilliant Tim Traveller video that goes into far more detail. Like many border stations, Hendaye has a bit of history. Under the roof of the main train shed there are tracks of 2 gauges, French standard gauge and Iberian broad gauge. This made it, on the 23rd of October 1940, an ideal location for the only ever meeting of Franco and Hitler. On paper it was a bit of a disaster. They turned out to hate each other and Franco's scruffy train was outshone by the Führer's gleaming carriages. Hitler only really wanted Spain in the war for its ability to capture Gibraltar for the Axis and thus control of the Mediterranean. All he got from the meeting at Hendaye was a vague commitment that Spain would enter the war at an unspecified future moment. For Franco, this was probably the best outcome. That unspecified moment never came, but had it done so, it's hard to imagine the victorious Allies consenting to a fascist regime remaining in power in Spain until 1975, but Franco's fence-sitting allowed a blind eye to be turned. 3 gauges of railway line cross the border between Hendaye and Euskadi. In this day and age, astonishingly, passenger trains run on just one of them, the narrow gauge line of Euskadi, the regional operator run by the Basque government. Its tiny beachhead on French soil is now in a smart little termini just outside the Grand SNCF station, from where our narrow gauge adventure right across Spain begins. The locals call this train El Topo, the mole, due to its habit of tunnelling through the steep green hills and under towns. I do think there's something of the sleekness of a velveteen mole in the design of the smart Euskadi electric trains, locally sourced from Basque train builder CAF. Trains are frequent here, every half hour, on what is a suburban network for the northeastern Basque conurbation. Within seconds of leaving Hendaye, we cross the Bidasoa and enter Euskadi in Spain. The first stop, Euskadi-Ficoba, used to have the accurate but basic name of Puente Internacional. In pre-Schengen days, we'd all have had to alight here a minute into the journey and walk through customs, while the train pulled empty up the platform to pick us up on the other side of a platform-splitting fence. Basque nationalists, for whom both sides of the border are Euskadi, must have been particularly irked by this palaver. If you want a shining example of the linguistic politics and tensions of the area, on the edge of Euskadi, the Euskotren calls it a station called Bentak. Literally 10 metres away is a broad gauge station run by the Spanish State Railway called Ventas. Clearly these are the same place in Basque and Castilian Spanish, but neither the local operator owned by the separatist-run regional government or the national company run by the unionist Madrid government is going to bow to bilingualism. Language and architecture set Euskadi apart. There's something oddly Swiss about the domestic rural architectural vernacular, and I think there's some other similarities. A nation set apart in their mountain fastness, a desire not to be hauled into great power politics, and a generally prosperous pocket. In Spain, only Madrid and Euskadi top the EU GDP per capita average. The Basque history is one of guerrilla defenders of the homeland, using their mountains and forests militarily. This is almost the only part of modern Spain that the Moors never conquered. The Romans realised their best interests were to simply come to a free movement agreement across Basque soil for their legions, and only the Basques defeated the armies of Charlemagne. That history of resistance continued into the 20th century. As we head along the short hop towards San Sebastian, we call it Errenteria. 700 Allied aircrew were smuggled through the Pyrenees on mountain paths by Basque anti-fascists. Their overnight journey would be timed to arrive here in time for the morning peak, when they would blend into the commuters on the San Sebastian train. We could easily blend a few escaped airmen into this packed train this morning. Opposite me, a student reads Derrida in Basque as we squeeze past the balconies of Pasea, a port town whose docks were built on land reclaimed using earth excavated while building El Topo's tunnels in 1912. Approaching San Sebastian, or Donostia, our journey becomes more metro-like. In 2011, Euskotren buried the lines of the city in tunnels, including stations with Spain's longest escalators. For now, the above-ground Euskotren terminus at San Sebastian Amara remains, but its days are numbered. Work is well underway to build more tunnels to loop narrow-gauge trains through the city centre and briefly under its famous white sands. I stayed here last night and can report that San Sebastian, for all its shishiness and tourist crowds, is gorgeous. Despite spending much of his dictatorship antagonising Basque nationalists, Franco was able to spend most of his summers here with just the one assassination attempt. But this morning, we need to push on to our second Euskotren service, joining everyone else in piling onto the Bilbao train, though few will be going the full distance given that the bus takes half the time. Mid-June seems to be a time when half of Spain's secondary school-aged youth is on the move in big groups, with a single harassed teacher for each rowdy crowd. At over 3 hours, San Sebastian to Bilbao is by far Euskotren's longest route. Their one concession to accidentally running a very slow intercity service is fitting a small number of their otherwise metro-esque trains with toilets for it. The first subset of Spain's travelling young people were heading for Usabil for a football tournament. Usabil is apparently famed for its cider houses and the local delicacy of elvers. That's eel fry for the uninitiated. I'll let you guess which one of those really appeals to me and which doesn't. Clear of the San Sebastian suburbs, and this rapidly becomes a contender for the loveliest electrified commuter railway in the world, as we follow the meandering, muddy Orla River on its lazy journey towards the Atlantic. The Basques, as explorers and fishers, knew to hide their ports one river meander inland, sheltered from the Atlantic storms. That's the case of the former fishing and whaling port of Oviedo, where in 1901 the last Biscayan right whale to be caught was landed. The species has barely been seen since. Having spent much of the past couple of days on national operator Renfe, Euskotren is quite a contrast. Efficient, punctual, tightly staffed, and able to run a frequent service very effectively on long, largely single-track railways. Another addition to my "the Basques are secretly Swiss" conspiracy theory. We call it Zarautz, a seaside resort just down the road from where the first person to circumnavigate the world, Juan Elcano, was born. The bloke he was with, by the name of Magellan, doesn't count, what with him dying part way round. In this corner of Euskadi, nearly 3/4 of the population speak Basque as their first language. That's certainly borne out on this train, where I've barely heard a word of Castilian Spanish, though it is possible that some of the teenage grunts may have been in the language of Cervantes. Suddenly, we get a brief and very rare glimpse of the shining Atlantic. This tricky coastal section of the railway took a decade longer to build than the rest of the line from Bilbao, probably explaining why there's so little coastal running on this coastal railway, despite the advantage of narrow gauge in coping with the twists and turns in challenging topography. Down from the cliff tops, the train squeals past the beach at Deba. During the Peninsular War, this was a suitably remote spot, away from the French-patrolled main road for the Royal Navy to land arms for Spanish guerrillas. The cannon were then hauled overnight across the coastal mountains to Navarre by teams of oxen. Deiba is another important point for the exchange of large groups of teenagers, and reloaded with a particularly sing-song contingent, the train courses inland up the valley of Deiba's namesake river, the scenery never missing a beat. The tradition of metallurgy and manufacturing in the Basque province of Gipuzkoa means that alongside the stunning scenery, parts of the inland valley are packed with towns, linking which provides this slow train with its raison d'etre. Eibar comes first, a town with a strong socialist tradition, which was the first town in Spain to declare the Second Republic after the 1931 general election, gaining it the accolade of very exemplary city, which sounds better in Spanish. By contrast, Ermua, just next door, voted for the right in those same 1931 elections. In a different era, the 1997 kidnap and murder of a local councillor here by ETA led to a movement that became known as the Spirit of Ermua, a social rejection of violence and possibly the start of the road to the eventual 2011 ceasefire. Onwards we climb and descend through meadows and orchards, swapping passengers at each of the frequent stops, as people hop from town to town and village to university. The stations alternate between pretty traditional halts and glass and steel metro-style edifices. Durango was one of the earliest victims of aerial warfare, bombed 4 times by the Condor Legion in 1937, killing 300. And earlier in its life it was the home to a relatively successful group of heretics who preached common ownership of property and women, and I don't mean the latter in a progressive way. It all ended, as these things tend to, with the burning of 100 heretics in the town square. If you're going to take the longest narrow gauge journey anyway, you might as well poke your nose up some of the branch lines a bit as well, I reckon. I'm hopping off the train at Lemois to catch one heading back east, then north, climbing steadily up to a tunnel under the Ortsagane Pass, then descending through a landscape of uncountable shades of green, and they don't call this the Costa Verde for nothing. Through halts with the narrowest of island platforms, to arrive at a little town that is the spiritual heart of Euskadi, and a name made famous, albeit normally in its Castilian form, by Senor Picasso. It's time for a wander, though first an urgently needed lunch of pincho, the Basque cold answer to tapas, and a glass of that super dry Basque cider, Zagadua. Guernica is the seat of the General Assembly of the Basque province of Bizkaia, or Biscay, whose classical buildings glow next to the paltry but well-protected remains of the tree of Guernica. The Basque country was historically a very loose collection of largely self-governing valleys and towns, whose citizens would assemble at local oaks. Gradually, Guernica became the preeminent meeting place for Bizkaia, whose laws were drawn up under Guernica's oak. Basque rulers did, and still do, swear an oath to God and the old laws, the fueros, and these became the basis of Basque separatism. For centuries, Basque nationalism was a largely conservative movement in defence of the relatively liberal fueros, which were ahead of their time on things like women's inheritance rights. But despite its political significance, Guernica remained a small, sleepy town. The decision by nationalist forces to carry out one of the world's first urban aerial bombardments here was a symbolic strike on the political and spiritual heart of this part of Euskadi, and against the broad Basque support for the Republic, not on any strategic reasoning. Guernica is a major market town for the region, and the German Condor Legion and Italian Aviazione Legionaria chose a Monday, market day, to strike, knowing the town would be full of people from across the region. 22 tons of bombs were dropped that day, the town reduced to smoking ruins, people trying to flee machine-gunned from the air. The number killed remains disputed, but between 170 and 300 is generally thought to be the range. Thanks to that painting, the name is perhaps bigger than the town, which is a rebuilt pleasant place amid the green hills, where storks nest on the tower of Santa Maria Church. Time to move on, by train I think, though a gentle paddle down the River Oka looks tempting on this 33-degree afternoon. Thank you, Euskadi, for investing in effective air conditioning. Back down the branch, calling at the lovely little passing loop station in the middle of nowhere at Zugastieta, which serves very little but gets 4 electric trains an hour thanks to its location on the Bilbao suburban network. Back on the San Sebastian to Bilbao main line, and it's a lovely late afternoon run down the Ibaizabal Valley. This is the river on which Bilbao sits, and its name simply means wide river. Our train is full of sleeping small children, dozing off a hot day on the beach at Bermeo. As we approach Bilbao, industry, both active and very much not, begins to crowd the valley floor. This railway from Durango, opened in 1882, was the first narrow gauge line in Biscay and facilitated the steady crawl of industry into the hills. At the gleaming Cucuyaha station, where I hop off, the train does something odd. Until now it was a semi-rural narrow gauge local train from Bermeo. It now seamlessly becomes a Bilbao metro train running under the city centre as part of a combined service. The trains used to take those lines branching left, currently disused, to a dedicated narrow gauge terminus at Bilbao at Zuri. I've partly got off here so I can take the original meter gauge route into the city centre, but also to enjoy one of the ways the Basques cope with half their citizens living above precipitous hillsides. A self-service, free-stop funicular linking the Cucuyaha station with the suburb of San Antonio, 100 metres above. From the funicular's middle station, which mainly seems to serve some woods, I'm hiking through the heat. Thankfully the digital sign is claiming it's 42 degrees or exaggerating by 10, then taking another meter gauge metro line one stop to Bolueta. This used to be a stop on the narrow gauge railway into Atzuri, and now it's the terminus of the tramway that's taken over most of that route. Despite being some of the widest tram vehicles I've ever seen, these monsters are meter gauge too. We edge past the old Atzuri terminus, where once the trains from San Sebastian terminated, and squeal round sharp curves to enter the city centre streets. The tram trundles at half Basque cyclist speed. To be fair, every Basque cyclist, and of a pleasing number, seems very well equipped and fast, round the edge of Bilbao's old town, along the river banks on a single track line, back over the river, and drops us here, where it's living up to its wide river moniker. The Guggenheim Foundation, struggling for cash in the early 90s, got very lucky in finding a Basque regional government struggling with deindustrialisation, with an urgent need for a symbol of cultural renewal, and ready to stump up the full cash sum for a very grand modern art museum. There is clearly a sense of puzzlement and maybe even injustice locally that Picasso's Guernica never ended up in the Bilbao Guggenheim, but when your huge Jeff Koons puppy has become enough of a civic landmark for striking Uber drivers to hold their demo next to it, you've achieved some sort of cultural cut-through. And this feels like a good place to round off day one of our journey. After all, the number of major art galleries with a meter gauge tramway running under them probably rounds to 0. I'm off in search of shade and Sagardua. Bilbao's old town, Zazpicaliac, can provide those things and more in abundance, in particular around the sociable, cafe-lined Plaza Barria, where what I assume are the Athletic Club's reserves are hard at the training. Vegetarian-friendly pinchos are a bit of a rarity, but the concept is brilliant, so the hunt is worth it. The potato gratin with truffles served at Globo in the Piazza's arcades is to die for, which is why there were 2 on my plate to accompany a glass of Basque Chacoli. That whole lot in the city's prime spot somehow came to just €11. In the dying shades of this early summer evening, I'm strolling this delectable but lived-in old town, running across accordion-backed male voice choirs in backstreet bars, and ending up wandering at the super confusing Zazpicaliac metro station, where a window into the hillside gives you a view of the underground trains running above you as you enter. We're in a world of slightly bizarre public transport, and tomorrow some of it will take us deeper into the wilds. Good morning, welcome to day 2 of our adventure across Spain on Europe's longest narrow gauge journey. I'm up bright and early and back on the Bilbao riverside, up with the dustman, to leave from this beautiful, beautiful Belle Epoque station just behind me, emblazoned as it is with the names of two former operators of this railway. We're heading ever westwards on towards Cantabria, and if all goes well today, Asturias, as we head out into wilder territory where the trains are less frequent, they run on diesel, they're small, and the bane gets a little bit wilder as we head further west. But first, I'm dropping into the broad gauge terminus next door. Unlike the narrow gauge Concordia, a Bando station is unprepossessing from the outside, but head up to platform level and you can be awed by this incredible 1948 stained glass depiction of Basque industries, landscapes and architecture. It's a great backdrop for breakfast. The barman was a little puzzled by my order at this time in the morning, but this will be my last chance to eat Basque cheesecake in the Basque country, so cultural norms be damned. While we're still in Euskadi for the first part of today's journey, we're at the end of the Euskotren network. From here on in, we're on a network that many people still refer to as FERVE, the former Ferrocarril Español de Vía Estrecha, Spanish narrow gauge railways, unimaginatively, but which has been merged into national operator Renfe since 2013. The main business of two-platform Concordia station is a frequent narrow-gauge Cercanías suburban electric service, but about 4 times a day the quiet is disturbed by the patient thrumming of one of these little chunks of a diesel unit waiting to head for Santander, or very occasionally down the even less frequented line to Leon. Lightly loaded, our train sets off on its 3-hour, 30-stop journey to Santander. Renfe's trains may be much less frequent and reliable than Euskotren's, but they do supply the comfiest, best padded and ergonomic armchairs you'll ever find in your local diesel rail car. Our first few miles are in tunnels, where we call it marble-coated suburban stations, a weird rural interloper looked on at with general condescension by Bilbao-bound commuters. Then we're out into the open, climbing above Bilbao's industry and estuary, then inland up the Cadagua Valley, where, as so often in mountainous and populous Euskadi, there are highways in the sky. It somehow took 10 separate private companies to build this railway, and they fought ferociously about the choice of gauge. The metre gauge's economy and ability to cope with the topography eventually won out. I've been pre-warned about the timekeeping on this line. We've barely started and we've so far been delayed by a leisurely start from Bilbao, a late local train in front and a broken down level crossing. Everyone's taking it in their stride as the cost of doing business. It increasingly feels like we're in deep countryside. We pass Grenes, a village that holds an annual cooking competition using an olla ferrovia, a type of portable coal-fired stove used by railway workers on these remote lines, branch off the Ropla line to Leon and begin to climb. Almost anywhere else in the world, these stunningly scenic railways would be a major tourist attraction. But Renfe seem to prefer you don't know they exist. There's zero promotion, timetables are hard to find, often uploaded to the journey planners just days ahead of time, and the network seems to be gently crumbling, as evidenced by numerous sections with 30 km/h, 20 km/h, and even truly somnambulant 10 km/h speed restrictions. Amid the alpine meadows, we pass through the request halt at Villa Verde, a little enclave of Cantabria that has existed in this form since it was purchased by the Constable of Castile in the 15th century. Local politicians and populace twice took their desire to reintegrate into the Basque country to the Spanish Supreme Court in the 1980s and 90s without joy. Even in the 20th century, those 200,000 marks paid 500 years earlier took precedence. This peaceful valley was devastated in a bloody battle during the Third Carlist War in 1875. You're an intelligent lot who no doubt fully understand the first 2 Carlist wars, so I don't need to explain the third one to you. At Carranza, or Carranza to strictly monolingual Renfe, we are briefly back in Euskadi and at the end of the electric wires. The morning train from Santander is waiting for us in the passing loop here, and we swap crews, making sure it inherits some of our delay. Beyond, we are in Cantabria proper, a much more remote-feeling land. Raggedy sheep scatter from the train, hay is being harvested by hand scythe, bare rocky-summited mountains rear above the forested hills. The villages are remote agricultural hamlets, not mini-industrial towns. Each Ferrol line follows the same pattern. A section out of each main city with reasonably frequent suburban trains, then a long, sparsely populated section between the 2 suburban termini with an equally sparse train service. At Maron, which passes for a large town around here, we start to pick up passengers again, and indeed to pick up speed, as we head along the valley of the Asson.
This is one of Cantabria's major rivers, but is a mere 50 kilometres in length, the mountains hugging the coast so closely that the river's lives from mountain torrent to mud-flat embraced estuary are accelerated. Continuing my principle of adding a branch line diversion to my journey where possible, I'm hopping off the sleepy junction of Orejo, where white butterflies flutter around the ballast, lizards dart across the hot platform, and Renfe has undertaken some vicious pollarding of the trees. We're back onto electric wires now, here on the margins of the Santander Cercanías network, and our next train, rolling in slightly late, of course, is an electric unit, all curves and glass, where our train from Bilbao was boxy and right angles. The train resembles a greenhouse, and the aircon is struggling to manage that on another swelteringly hot day. But despite that, this little commuter unit is a delight to travel on, as we immediately swing south on a branch line. There's so much glass you almost feel like you're in the landscape. This little railway was built to transport iron ore from the Sierra de Cabrera mountains to Santander's docks, but it couldn't feel less industrial now, as we swing through the meadows, past cows searching for any patch of shade. That iron ore also shaped the town of La Cavada, home of Spain's Royal Artillery factory from 1622 to 1835, where cannon were forged the Spanish Empire. Our trains sailing right past the archway of this erstwhile factory town. The terminus is at Liaganes, a little village at the foot of the mountains, and awarded the title of one of the most beautiful villages in Spain. I'm in no position to judge, but it is lovely. All honeystone patrician houses, geraniums, and a supermarket that will sell me an ice-cold beer for 55 cents. Even the local, and I mean local, bank is delightful. 2 minutes walk from the station and you reach the so-called Roman Bridge, a problematic name for a structure built in 1587, posed photogenically in front of a pair of hills called the Tetas de Liaganes. I'll let you work out why they're called that, but I'm suggesting a twinning arrangement with the Paps of Jura. Up the branch, calling it the minor spa town of Solares, whose bottled water is all over this corner of Spain, and on towards Santander. During the gauge wars, this stretch of line was originally built as an Iberian broad gauge route. That lasted just 4 years before metre gauge decisively won, and astonishingly, the entire 25-kilometre stretch of line was converted to the narrower gauge overnight. Past Santander's out-of-town shopping centre, where our train is invaded by macro bag-wielding crowds, across the protected marshland that separates it from the town, and through the extensive freight yards, a reminder that the narrow gauge network does still play a role in carting steel coils and iron ore around, even though that traffic lost the lines so much money that Franco nationalised them. First thing that surprises a Londoner arriving in Santander, who is most used to the town's name cropping into their consciousness because it's branded all over our hire bicycles, is that Santander's cycle hire scheme isn't sponsored by the local bank. We have 2 hours here before our next train, and for the first time today we can enjoy the sea from under the welcome shade of the Bolin Arts Centre's trendy overhang. Ahead, the shimmering golden sands of the Puntal Spit. Behind us, the Pont Avon ferry loads for its imminent departure to Plymouth. Santander has been shaped by 2 disasters. First, the explosion of the dynamite-carrying Cabo Machiego ship in 1893, which killed 300, including a load of very silly spectators who were watching it merrily blaze away, and destroyed 70 buildings. Then the less deadly but more destructive 1941 fire, which took out the entire historic core of the town, apart from the cathedral. Reconstruction took 25 years and was done on Francoist principles of social segregation, with prosperous homes in the centre and workers relegated to the outskirts. Santander station has 2 halves separated by a central tower, the sleepy broad gauge lines on one side, the bustling narrow gauge suburban services on the other, with a tiled depiction of where we've come from and where we're going. The train's speed is not wholly reflective of reality. Indeed, there's a definite leisureliness to the proceedings here. For our 15:28 departure, the driver only wanders along the platform to start shunting the train out the siding at 15:25. Though somehow we get away only 3 minutes late after everyone has flipped those comfy seats to face forward. We're a full load at the start of our twice-a-day, 5.5 hour, 45 stop journey to Oviedo. It's a short express run to the town of Torrelavega, the approach to which is almost stereotypically industrial. The town is the headquarters of that almost uniquely Spanish concept, a powerful anarcho-syndicalist trade union. As I expected, our train empties out here before we trundle on. I'm not saying the pace is gentle, but these guys don't seem to be having to work very hard to form a peloton with us. At the textile town of Cabezon de la Sal, we reach the end of the electrified Santander Cercanías network and are about to enter the more remote territory where we will be one of just 2 trains per day. Worryingly, the driver restarts the engine about 6 times while we wait to depart onto this mountainous stretch. Eventually, he seems happy, gives a hoot of the horn, eliciting a thumbs up from the station master. She disappears briefly, returns carrying her cap and flag, ceremonially places the cap on her head and whistles us away. I strongly approve. Imagine how low standards would be if you could dispatch a train bar tat. With the topography against us, a familiar pattern emerges. The railway hitches a ride up a valley until the river turns south towards the mountains. Head up a side valley and then find the lowest pass into the next river basin, dropping through pastures of handsome cows to rinse, repeat, and gain another few kilometres of westward progress. At San Vicente de la Barquera, lots of well-loaded hikers and cyclists join us. The station is very poorly located for the town it claims to serve, but the Camino del Norte pilgrimage path to Santiago, which has shadowed us since Hendaye, goes practically past the platform. Under the storm light in Unquera, we rumble across the River Deva, marking the border of Cantabria and Asturias, the third autonomous community of the journey, though so staunch was Asturias' defence of the Republic that Franco never allowed it to be called anything more than the province of Oviedo. There's a magical section of line as we approach Pendueles, suddenly emerging onto the limestone coast, the Atlantic below, the peaks of the Sierra del Cuera ahead, branches scraping along the side of the train as it interlopes along this lightly used line. Slowly the mountains creep closer to the coast, the landscape and architecture changing with the regional boundary. There's now more whitewashed houses and dry stone walls. A handful of us travelling further west have been forewarned by our friendly guard that we will need to switch trains in Llanes, a fishing port and seaside resort halfway along the line. The crew and train from Santander will return from whence they came, and those from Oviedo will do vice versa. As part of a constant struggle to keep the few serviceable trains at the right end of the line, this switcheroo apparently happens every other day. We don't have long to wait at Llanes before a somewhat more modern, if rather scruffy train rocks in from Oviedo, piquing the interest of the waiting dog. There's plenty of glass on this train, making for a wonderfully panoramic journey, but I'm mourning the loss of the deep, comfy armchairs on the older train. The Oviedo driver is clearly determined to regain some time and is rocketing along. There's going to have to be some spectacular braking if there's anyone waiting at any of the request stops. A strange hazy light hangs over the Picos de Europa as we head towards Riba de Sella along a more railway-friendly ledge between sea and Picos. We drop a ludicrously steep gradient to the banks of the Sella estuary, where the view from Cuevas station platform is extremely pleasant, which is lucky for the people waiting there who seem to have turned up 2 hours early for their eastbound train. Through Ariondas, where the snow patches on the high Picos loom over the town, and we continue to follow the Sella Valley, a haven for canoeists and kayakers. Mrs. Turtle notices that one kayak company has a turtle drifting lazily downstream on its back as its logo. She is, apparently, well up for some of that. As evening draws in, we reach the slightly menacing sounding town of Linfiesto. It looks perfectly pleasant, though it has the first scattered apartment blocks and spots of industry we've encountered for hours. It's also the eastern end of the Asturias Cercanías network, and electric wires reappear above us. It may be a bit more on the beaten track, but it's still a lovely stretch of line. At Cicada, 2 neighbours, one boarding and one alighting, position themselves strategically at the door so the train can't depart before some crucial gossip is exchanged. On this glorious evening for rolling down the Nora Valley, I note that, with trains much more frequent here, the local livestock is far more sanguine about our passage than on the less frequented sections. Only the youngest calves, lambs and foals scatter from us. Skirting the edge of the Asturian coal basin, we clatter through El Berron, the heart of the local narrow gauge network and the location of a real treat for rail infrastructure geeks. Two double-track passenger railway lines crossing each other on the flat at 90 degrees, where the coal-carrying line from the Nalon Valley to the port at Gijón slices north-south across us. It's claimed this layout appears nowhere else in Europe. And so, after 5.5 hours through the most stunning, varied scenery, which made the journey feel half as long, just 10 minutes late, the journey from Santander ends incongruously in the concrete basement that is Oviedo's railway station, our humble train sliding in alongside the sleek high-speed Aves. Soulless it may be, but I appreciate the historic tiled advertisements, many for local confectionery products, that are scattered around the station. It's weird weather in Oviedo, or Oviedo if you're of an Asturian linguistic bent. Misty but trying to be sunny, warm but trying to be chilly, a contradiction which gives the sprawling city centre an odd atmosphere. With the vast pedestrianised streets empty and the elegant and delicate cathedral shuttered for the evening, there's a slightly cold and haughty air to this upland 9th century city. But then I stumbled upon a street called Calle Gascona, and all that changed. This steep pedestrianised road is a raucous, high-spirited and hugely fun strip of sidrerias, cider bars serving a superb local apple product. Food order taken and a large bottle of sharp rustic cider is plonked on your table, your glass replenished as needed by waiters in the traditional way, the escanciar, bottle held high above the head, glass below the waist, cider poured with eyes deliberately averted. Does it improve the taste? I don't know. Does quite a lot of this cider end up splashed on the road? Yes. But it is theatrical. Gently stumbling back to my 8th floor hotel room, whose window looks out over where the station roof used to be, the mist is now thicker. The lights along the old railway line stretch northwards into the cloud bank as I head to bed before another early start.
Buenos dias, welcome to Oviedo in Asturias for the third day of our narrow gauge adventure right across Spain. It's even earlier than yesterday, if that makes any kind of sense at all, and I'm competing with the background noise of the Dawn Chorus, standing in front of Salvador Dali's statue Man and Dolphin. Join me for my further adventures of Man and Turtle as we take the third, final and perhaps most mammoth leg of this journey to the far west of Spain.
In the historic station building, there's time to grab a café con leche and a slice of apple cake for breakfast. If it's a side town, it must also be a good apple cake town, right? And to bamboozle the lady at the Renfe ticket office with my destination request. She eventually tells me to go to the Ferrol ticket desk, despite the operations having been merged for 13 years. The Ferrol desk is firmly closed, so instead I buy a ticket on my phone, a functionality that has come only recently to these remote lines. A tiny little single-car train is shunted away from our hidden platform, and our rail car emerges from the sidings. For a moment I think it's the same train I arrived on yesterday. The graffiti removal marks look weirdly similar, but the unit numbers confirm it's a different little beast. Nearly empty as it begins its 7.5-hour journey west, it feels like it's fulfilling a truism that all journeys on this route start with an underground section where the rural train calls weirdly and unwantedly urban stations. This train makes 88 stops. Most of them won't look like El Valobin. As we clear the Oviedo suburban tunnels, the mist clears slightly. We're rattling along a stretch of line that was converted from broad gauge to narrow as recently as 1997, though unlike that bit near Santander, it took 2 years rather than a single night, though apparently that time did also include building this viaduct over the river Nalon as well. At Trubia, our bearded driver changes ends and we reverse to descend the valley towards the sea. Trubia was another Royal Arms manufactory, though more recent than that at La Cavada. In 1937, the Asturian workers here shot their commanding officers in revenge for the nationalist coup. The next stretch of line was always narrow gauge and carried coal from the mining basin to the port at San Esteban. At Penaflor, we crossed the original Santiago Camino, the so-called Primitivo path, the route Alfonso II took from Oviedo to Compostela in 814. At Grado, we wait for the Oviedo-bound commuter train to cross us, giving time to make the acquaintance of some rail-loving cats. The town's history is less adorable, though. In 1937, nationalist forces from Galicia quickly captured the town and turned half of it into a concentration camp. Mass graves of at least 300 Republicans have been found here since the war. Through mist-hung orchards and dewy meadows munched by brown cows, we come to Baifar, where there's a oreo beside the station, a local design of raised granary to keep the harvest safe from rodents and moisture, and thence to Pravia, a four-way narrow-gauge junction where rifles were landed for the 1934 Asturian miners' revolution and amuse-bouche for the Civil War proper. I'd not studied my railway geography properly and had a panicked moment when the train seemed to have taken the branch line towards the coast. Happily, the westbound line actually somersaults over the branch just beyond the station, so we were actually going the right way. Nearly every line we've taken so far dates from the 1880 to 1915 window. This one is much newer. The need for a railway to link the mines and arms manufactories of Asturias with the navy at Ferrol was identified in 1886. With little progress in 35 years, the government took over the project in 1921. Wars and recessions intervened. The topography was, as ever, against the railway. Nothing was built until 1953. The section up to Luarca opened in 1962, and still, as we will see, the line wasn't complete. Oviedo, we reached the end of the Asturian Sec and the S network, and from here on we're just one of 2 trains per day squealing westward. Our previously driver-only train gains a cheery conductor to deal with request stops and stations without ticket machines. There's a brief first glimpse of the dramatic coastline as we pull into the halt at La Magdalena, where more passengers lurch aboard under the weight of huge rucksacks. A little train for carrying passengers and their walking poles to obscure bits of countryside was not the strategic use that the line's planners foresaw in 1886. But it took so long to open that within a few decades it was being superseded by the Autovia del Cantabrico. It will take our meandering, contour-hugging train 15 minutes to reach the other end of that motorway viaduct high above us. Despite this, no expense was spared to build the railway when they finally got round to it. The station facilities at Novillana, a request stop serving a village of 310 people, are remarkable in their size. And on this newer stretch, there was no shying away from building plenty of viaducts and tunnels, which may have made the route a bit shorter, but will have added to the expense and construction time. When I said this train will make 88 stops en route to Ferrol, it could have been more. Remarkably, this train is actually timetabled to skip some stations, not because no one's requested them, but because 2 trains a day would be an overkill of a service for them. Just the afternoon train will suffice. These beautiful Asturian mountain cattle seem somewhat surprised that anyone has requested the train to stop at San Cristobanu. The train balances on a ledge on our way into the handsome harbour town of Luarca, which is apparently home to the world's only giant squid museum. The current museum replaces one that was destroyed in a storm in 2014, which feels like it should have been seen as some sort of a warning or portent that the Kraken wasn't too keen on the exhibits. Onward through a brief and surprising moment of population and industry density at Navia, where nearly everyone gets off. This section of line from Luarca to the Galician border was the very final stretch of this narrow gauge route across Spain to be completed in 1972, a mere 86 years after planning commenced. By this point, most of the strategic, economic and military case for the railway had long since evaporated. I think it was finished out of embarrassment as much as anything else. Have you ever built a metre gauge railway line out of social embarrassment? Let me know in the comments. I am a huge fan of these tiled FEVE route maps that still appear at some stations, in various states of disrepair, that again make that direct link between our rail odyssey and the Santiago pilgrim route it shadows. We're crisscrossing the Camino del Norte or Camino de la Costa path, one of the less well travelled and more strenuous routes to Compostela. It normally takes 5 weeks for a pilgrim on foot to travel from Irún to Santiago along the Camino del Norte. Broadly comparable with a narrow gauge train, to be honest. The railway makes an enormous diversion inland to find a point where it can cross the Via de Villarbadejo. A via is like a flat fjord, and we're coming into a bit of Spain with a lot of them. As we descend towards sea level, some stern and wild Galician mountains stare gauntly at us across the estuary. And so at Vegadeo, we find our spot to cross the Via and its yellow flower-flecked marshes, crossing as we do into Galicia, our final autonomous community of the journey. The remote top left-hand corner of Spain, another region with its own language and its own separatist movement. As we climb away from the estuary, I'm moved again to ask why no one markets these railways. There are, I think, 5 people on this train, and it feels selfish that we're hogging all this incredible scenery to ourselves. At the first stop in Galicia, Ribadeo, the side of the railway which is marketed is drawn up at the platform in the form of the handsome coaches of El Cantabrico, a narrow gauge luxury cruise train of many years standing. Fares in its plush but diminutive sleeper compartments start well into 4 figures of euros. There's a chance for a happy conflab and nicotine moment of railway staff at Ribadeo, where our quite delayed train waits for the a bit more delayed eastbound morning train. Well, it was morning when it started its journey in Ferrol, before we clatter on our quiet way west. The Galicians made slightly faster progress with building their part of the line, probably thanks to having more coastal small towns to link, and frequencies reflect this. Beyond Ribadeo, there were a whopping 4 trains per day. Thanks to a young lady hanging out at Marzan station, causing the train to slow in case she wanted to board, she didn't, we get a great view of a traditional Galician dovecot, a pombal, next to the platform. For once, the coastal railway is actually starting to act like a coastal railway, as we rattle past the golden sands and azure seas at Playa de Arroea, then the fishing port and albacore canning factory at Barela. If we get much more scenic scenery, I'm going to have to learn enough Spanish to teach the lady in front of me how to turn the camera shutter noise effect on her iPhone off. Luckily, though, she doesn't want to take any photos of the aluminium works at Budueros. Up and down another headland, and we descend sharply to Vivero, a town whose principal business, as far as I can tell, is holding carnivals, Holy Week celebrations, and general knees up. A noticeable change in the landscape since about an hour out of Oviedo has been the unexpected number of eucalyptus trees in the forests, obviously not native but introduced to Spain in the 19th century. They now account for an astonishing 28% of Galicia's trees, thanks to their ability to rapidly colonise land cleared by forest fires. With a lavish 4 trains a day on this bit of line, I don't feel I can let all this scenery sail past and not get off for a bit. So I've requested a stop at Loiba Halt from the conductor. I do like the Spanish verb to request a train to stop is a petición, which makes it sound a much more formal process than the conductor marking his sheet with a biro. Gracias. The moment you step from the train at this woodland halt, you're hit by the sinus-clearing scent of eucalyptus. I'm following my sole fellow alightee up the long station approach road towards the scattered villages just up the hill. Through the pretty little villages studded with citrus trees, managing to dash into the tiny supermarket 2 minutes before it closes for siesta to source a picnic lunch. On through sturdy stone hamlets where the hydrangeas provide a direct botanical link to the Atlantic coast of Britain. Up one more sharp rise, and you do come to a passable spot for a picnic lunch. According to Google Maps and Atlas Obscura, this is the best bench in the world. According to TripAdvisor, it's a hellscape of Instagrammers. I've not seen a soul for the past 20 minutes. Mrs. Turtle, a keen bench aficionado, gives it 9.9 points out of 10, the decimal point being dropped for difficult access to the beach. But it does have most things you could need from a bench. Wildflowers, butterflies, the azure Atlantic breaking over jagged rocks that could smash your galleon to pieces in a westerly gale. And of course, easy-ish public transport access. That said, I accidentally returned to Loiba Halt by the unshaded route, which was a mistake, making it a delight to see that Renfe sign at the top of the shady station lane. And Loiba Halt feels like the sort of place where it's okay to lay your sweat-sodden shirt out to dry on the kindly provided bank of wild herbs, so long as you put it back on before the mid-afternoon train from Ribadeo turns up. Luckily, I chose not to believe the Spanish Live Departures website, which was predicting a 48-minute delay for this train, and I was up on the platform ready to flag it down when it turned up just 1 minute behind time, or it would have sailed straight past. Westwards across more wide estuaries, and at Ortiguera we become part of Ferrol's rather limited Cercanías network. It's one line, mainly run with single-car diesel trains. But you can tell we're in the suburbs because the train gains a security guard in high vis with a huge baton. As you can imagine, in these badlands, gritty isn't the word, he has his work cut out keeping the 3 passengers in order. The train grinds up its final steep climb of the journey, looping up through eucalyptus and Scots pine to Cerdido at over 250 metres high on a high plateau. Since we've become a Ferrol suburban train, the stations have frankly got sillier, serving lots of strategically vital clearings in the woods. We lost time waiting for an eastbound train in a loop, and driver and guard are working together to gain minutes back by running an informal request stop system down the long descent back to sea level and the Ferrol apartment blocks. It does feel a little odd as we stagger through the final moments of this great trek across northern Spain to still have people joining us at halts in the Ferrol suburbs, whose journeys will take just a few minutes. Interlopers, pure and simple. And so, with just 8 minutes delay in the end, we pull into the little dual-gauge terminus at Ferrol, the great natural harbour at the top left of Spain, and the end of Europe's longest narrow-gauge journey.
So we've arrived at the little terminus station of Ferrol here in Galicia at the end of our 3-day odyssey on Europe's longest narrow-gauge journey. We've spent about 21 hours, I think, on 12 or 13 trains and a tram. We've called it 269 stations by my count, and we have seen some incredible and beautiful places. We have been to gorgeous San Sebastian, to bustling Bilbao, to holy Oviedo, and we've seen the incredible Basque wooded mountains. We've seen the river valleys of Cantabria. We've seen the cliffs of Asturias and of Galicia and the villas of this northwestern corner of Spain. It's certainly not the fastest way to make that journey. It's only about 600 kilometres. You could do it in a few hours by bus. You could do it in a few hours more by mainline train travelling via Valladolid or Burgos. But it wouldn't be half as fun. We've trundled along. We've seen some great places. We've had friendly staff. We've seen scenery and towns and villages that we just wouldn't have experienced otherwise. So I hope it's been a great advert for a bit of slow travel. And from myself and Mrs. Turtle, we're off to go and explore Ferrol, this historic naval port on one of Europe, indeed maybe the world's best natural harbours. And we're going to take a little rest here, and we'll see you next time on the next journey.
Ferrol is an intriguing town. A huge naval base in its easily defensible, hard-to-blockade rear. It's a town where you get used to passing sailors in crisp whites and seeing signs that say property of the Armada about the place. You're rarely in any doubt that it's a military town. Somewhere offshore is the occasional boom of naval firing exercises, and the square in front of the town hall, the Plaza de Armas, strongly resembles a drill square. But while there is a risk that the almost unbroken grid pattern of the streets could become oppressive, it's lightened by the sheer expanse of the galerías on the house fronts with their huge expanses of glass. In the sun, the town sparkles. It's perhaps not a huge surprise this arch-military town would also be the birthplace of Francisco Franco, who has dogged our steps since Hendaye. Getting a shot of his birthplace without the suspicious owner of the clothes shop next door thinking you're some sort of Caudillo fanboy is a challenge. But ironically, in one of those weird coincidences that history throws up, Ferrol was also the birthplace of Pablo Iglesias, founder of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, central to the Second Republic that Franco overthrew, and, at time of recording, the leading governing party of Spain. It is Iglesias' politics with a touch of Galicianism that are dominant in Ferrol today. It's a city that feels at once at the heart of Spanish history and a bit of an out-way place hidden behind Galicia's hills. But then, it'd be very odd if Europe's finest backwoods railway journey was to end in a well-connected, bustling metropolis. Ferrol works well for the terminus of a remarkable, if rather odd, journey across northern Spain.